is my sincere privilege to welcome everyone to this conversation. Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday and happy opening of this CLE series. We are so thrilled as the Utah State Bar to be one of your co-hosts, to be helping us have a lively and engaged and what we hope is well-rounded conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We open this series with a focus on our business, our healthcare, our nonprofit, and government circles, wanting us to notice as practitioners that we impact those places of work and of business, but also that we receive clients and questions and legal policy issues from those circles. So we ought to be interdisciplinary in our focus. And that's the hope for today's conversation, that we build skills and build relationships. And speaking of relationships, this conversation, this CLE series has been born of a really wonderful and creative dynamic between the bar and UCLE, the Utah Center for Legal Inclusion, and the Inclusion Strategies Company, and Ross Romero from Inclusion Strategies is our moderator today. He is really the rudder of this conversation. He brought this notion to us as colleagues and embraced our friendships and our relationships to help create this CLE. I want to thank him for his dedication and his work to help us lift to today's point. The idea that there's more than 200 of us assembled here this afternoon for this conversation is heartening. It also shows the timely and imperative nature of this conversation. We can all be learning from each other. We can continue to borrow our skills and our best values and purpose from each other and different industries, but also we as lawyers just owe a certain amount of civic engagement and leadership to these conversations in our community in representing our clients and in trying to help the court system become more accessible to a wider range of legal questions. So I just invite you to participate with us in the chat. Please be mindful of others' perspective and civil as always in our conversation. We invite you to engage with us that way today, and we will be taking questions from the group. So please do post as something sparks your interest. Please don't hesitate to let us know that. And we're just wishing you all well in this series and hope to see you continuously from now through the next several months as we continue to host. I'll turn the time to our moderator, Ross Romero, and thank the co-sponsors and Ray Quinney and Nebeker, who is one of our financial sponsors for this series as well. Thanks to everyone. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for everyone's attendance and participation. Let me start off by saying that we had invited and in fact had planned on having Sydney Shorter, who's the executive director of the Utah Black Chamber, join us and bring that perspective. She is, however, en route from Washington, D.C. Back to Salt Lake, and I think has got delayed. And so she may join us at some point, but if not, you'll please understand why. With that, let me just introduce the panelists, and what I'm going to ask them to do is, I think it's important for us to understand what's going on around the state of Utah in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And so we're very fortunate to have experts that are involved in this conversation daily at very senior levels to bring perspective that they've experienced and that they're leading in their organizations and their business and government. And so we're going to draw on those expertise. I'll also say that Nubia Pena had been scheduled to be one of our panelists, and she's not able to join us because of duties on behalf of the state of Utah, but she has left us in very good hands with Weslie Porter. And so I'll just say Weslie is with the Utah Department of Government Operations, Division of Human Resource Management, and the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Accelerator for the state of Utah. And so we'll be hearing from him shortly. But first, I'm also going to invite Sui Lang Panoke, who's a Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Zions Bank. She's actually going to offer her comments first to us, but we also are joined finally on the panel by Olivia Jaramillo, the Director of Public Outreach on behalf of Equality Utah. So let me just turn some time over to them, again, to introduce themselves, what the organizations are doing, and that I think will draw some questions for us to think about. Please do, as you have questions, feel free to provide them in the chat, and we'll review them and ask the panelists along the way. But if we could please have an introduction, first by Sui Lang, and then Olivia, and finally by Wes.
Thank you so much, Ross, for the invitation to join today's conversation. And thank you, Michelle, for the warm welcome. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to join this conversation and learn more about diversity, equity, inclusion efforts in our state and how you can apply what we're doing to all of your roles as lawyers and attorneys and professionals in the legal profession. I have to admit, I do conversations like this all the time, but I was a little nervous about this one because Ross had described the audience as judges and lawyers and legal professionals. So I was nervous that I might say the wrong thing or all of those things. But Michelle's remarks earlier put me at ease that we are in a safe space. We are just here to share ideas, perspectives, experiences, and work towards building a culture of inclusion together in the communities that we serve. So really, really excited to hear from all of you as well and engage with all of you in this important work. A little bit about my background. I'm actually not a banker. I pretend to be a banker, but I work at a bank. My background is actually in politics and public policy. So many of you can relate to that. I had a passion for diversifying political leadership early on in my career. Studied political science at the University of Utah. I had a whole host of older white male progressives and conservatives, everything in between, those who identify as different identities as myself, identifying as a woman of color, invested me early on in my career. And that really helped shape my philosophy around diversity, equity, inclusion, which is generally you go to the margins and you work your way in. And so I think many of you can understand what that looks like, especially in the political realm. So I pursued my graduate degree back in Washington, D.C., where I lived on Capitol Hill for about 13 years doing this work. Diversifying political leadership, getting more women, people of color elected to public office. So I clearly recognize the importance of diversity in the policymaking arena. And so the roles that all of you play in our community are critical. And we're really grateful for the work you do there. So democratizing the media landscape as well has been a lot of my passion and my career up until this point. Moved back to Utah about 5 years ago and have dabbled quite a bit in corporate diversity, equity, inclusion, mostly as a consultant. And so Ross and I do a lot of work together in the community in this space. I'm also learning the differences between advising corporations, organizations, even nonprofit organizations from the outside, right? As a third party, a consultant versus being a full-time FTE employee of the institution, like the role I serve in now. I've been at Zions Bank 2 years now. I celebrate my 2-year anniversary, December 1st. And we could talk about what Zions Bank is doing in diversity, equity, inclusion for days and weeks and years. This year, we celebrate 150 years in business. Since it is Women's History Month, just wanted to note, in 1873, when we opened up our doors, of the first 15 depositors at Zions Bank, 5 of them were women, and 1 was an organization for women. And this would be nearly a century before federal legislation would be passed requiring all financial institutions to do the same. And so I'm very fortunate and privileged to work for an organization that has been championing equality in a myriad of ways since inception for 150 years. Just real quickly, I want to note why I accepted this role at Zions Bank. Number one, opportunity to work with Scott Anderson. Scott Anderson, and I describe to people outside the state of Utah, I report to our Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. His name is Scott Anderson, and he also serves as the president and CEO of Zions Bank. That is very, very important when you're going to be effective in pulling this off in a corporate structure, right? Power lies at the top. And in order to be successful, you have to have that buy-in. So I fortunately get to report directly to Scott, and then we build bridges laterally and vertically. The second reason was to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the banking and financial services industry specifically. There's a very specific role that banks and financial institutions play in the bigger picture of achieving true equality here in America, and that is economic inclusion. And that is what we are championing here at Zions Bank, and encouraging the rest of our community to do the same and join us in those efforts as well. It's a comprehensive strategy. And thirdly, again, I'm speaking very openly and candidly about identity. I wanted to work with older white conservative men specifically. Majority of my career has been working in women's leadership circles and multicultural communities. And so just recognizing the demographics that still hold overwhelming positions of power in our country today, I wanted to reach that other demographic, white men. And so I've been very fortunate to work with some of the most inclusive leaders that I have ever personally and professionally known throughout my career at Zions Bank. I will stop there, but I look forward to engaging with all of you and answering any questions that you may have.
I don't really want to follow that, you know, who can follow Sui Lang Panoke, really? So thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's amazing to be here with all of you. My name is Olivia Jaramillo. I'm the Director of Public Outreach at Equality Utah. Equality Utah is a nonprofit organization, and we've been around for 22 years this year. And for the 22 years, we've been working to build protections for the LGBTQ community with our state lawmakers and at municipal levels and really at all levels. And one of the things that after 22 years of work is that a lot of people don't know that Utah is one of the most conservative states in the country with the most protections for the LGBTQ community. And how did we get to that point? We got there by finding common ground with people and building on shared values. It would be so easy to put ourselves at an opposing side of a table with other people, but that is not how we move forward. When we all move forward, we move forward together. And that has really been Equality Utah's formula in building this change in the state of Utah. And after so long, we decided that how can we replicate, how can we take our formula of what we've done legislatively by helping build our Utah's first non-discrimination law, Utah's first hate crimes law, banning conversion therapy in the state of Utah. How can we move forward and build on the rest of the state? How can we affect every single workplace? And that is where my education program, Business Equality Leader, comes in, where we literally take Equality Utah's formula, again, finding common ground, building on shared values, and we replicate it into each corporation, each organization. And right now we are fortunate that we have, I believe, 26 Business Equality Leader partners, Zions Bank being one of our leading Business Equality Leader partners, and we're so happy to have this partnership with them. But what we look to do is we look to go into a workplace and we build that conversation with education by building an experience and really showing people what the LGBTQ community is all about. Sometimes it is very easy to be guided by social media and be told something about a community. But when suddenly it is right there in front of you, then it starts to rewire what you may have thought about a transgender person or a gay person. And you suddenly start seeing a different side of that. And we've been so grateful to be able to build with our 26 partners that, but we've also been able to partner with the Utah court system in which we started this journey of bringing our presentations to the entire Utah State Courts executive team. And right now, 2 days here, I'll be heading up to Logan to take care of the district courts up there. We're super excited to do that. We've also been able to speak at, last year in September, we spoke at the prosecutors retreat in St. George. We trained the state juvenile court judges at their retreat last year as well. So we're able to build these conversations. Again, we look to show people that all of us, we don't see people, any one type of person as the problem. We see those people as the solution for going forward. So that is how we like to build those conversations going forward. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Mexico. I immigrated to the United States when I was 14. I'm a 20-year retired Air Force veteran. Another cool thing I got to do when I was in the military is I was one of the first individuals nationwide to be able to transition from male to female while still serving on active duty. And that, again, for me personally, it highlighted that when we know somebody and then we learn something different about them, it makes it personal. So we can really use that if somebody comes out in our workplaces, and we can use that as a point of empathy. And that is one thing that we love to teach, that we love to show people, that there are ways that you can empathize with those. And what better way to do this than to talk about with people who provide that access to equal justice, to equal representation for justice. So if you have any questions about my organization or about me personally, please, I am an open book. Please ask me anything.
Oh, we got some power hitters today. I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, I'm also very humbled to be here with this wonderful panel, Ross, that you're able to assemble. Absolutely outstanding. Super excited to be here. So my name is Weslie Porter. I am the EDI Accelerator for the state of Utah, and that's kind of it's a long title, but bottom line, what my job is actually to look at internal training strategies and recruitment and retention strategies for the state of Utah. The state of Utah is actually the second largest employer here in the state. Right behind IHC, Intermountain Healthcare. So we've got about 22 to 23,000 employees. And when you look at that across the state of Utah, we have a lot of work to do when it comes to, and a lot of influence when it comes to talking about DEI initiatives, talking about not just defining what DEI is here in the state of Utah, but also framing what it is here in the state of Utah. Before I get into some of the different areas, I want to say that Olivia, kindred spirit, almost 20 years in the Army on that side. In fact, it was a military experience that I had serving as a liaison officer in Oman that got me into this work. And I'd just like to share that real quick. So I think I'll give a little bit of background. I'm flying on an airplane. My job is to be a liaison officer. So I'm going to go train the Omani Army how to do artillery. I'm a pretty good artillery person. I've done it for a long time. I was picked to do a couple different things and to help them out. And I'm flying this long, arduous journey all the way over there to Oman. And I'm looking through my notes. I'm saying, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to help them. Here's what I'm going to tell them. And here's what they're going to be when I'm done. And a whole plan lined out. And what was interesting is when I landed, I started talking to their military in a couple of different settings. And I noticed that there just wasn't a lot of engagement. And so I asked my interpreter what was going on. And what he said was I appreciate his honesty, because it's very difficult in some of their cultures to talk to different ranks for this. But the honesty was like, you're not making them feel like they're part of the team. You're not integrating anything that they do. And it was a humbling experience, because I realized that on that long plane flight over, when I was talking about how I'm going to strategize, how to teach these people, not once did I ask them what they needed. Not once did I ask them what their capabilities were. And it really put me in a position where I had this retrospective all the way home on that flight going, what else have you missed, Wes? What else have you missed? And really what that's done, it's made me realize that these communities that we serve, especially the state of Utah, a lot of times we deal with policy, procedure, and different things. And sometimes we forget to go to that community itself and ask them, what do you need? How can we help? We're here to serve you. And what do we need to do there? And really, that's what I brought to at least that experience to the state of Utah. So a couple of different initiatives that we have going on is that we're looking at recruitment strategies very, very deep. So we partnered with parity.org, which is an organization to help us align our data so we can see who's at the table, who we're serving. It also looks at our hiring data. It looks at our promotion data. It looks at our longevity data. And we're able to make some strategic decisions to say, hey, we've got some gaps here. Our recruitment strategy also involves our HR personnel and hiring managers now to actually go out to these communities and start building those particular relationships that we have. One thing that you probably heard too in the latest from Governor Cox is our skills-based initiative for hiring. So one thing that we've done in the past in Utah at the state, and I'll be honest with you, the state is like a big boat. So you're going to turn the wheel here, and it's going to take ages to kind of move, right? I think anyone who's worked in government would probably tell you the exact same thing. But one thing that we've noticed, we've always hired based on certain preferences in the past, right? And that's no small task when you're talking about how large we are here in the state. But with Governor Cox's initiative, looking at skills, it's really put a lot of individuals here at the state in a kind of a holding pattern to realize, how do we actually hire? How do we look for skills in the different applicants that actually come to us? And you tie that with our data. Well, our applicants tend to look the same. tend to come from the same background. Same with some of our promotion rates that we looked at. And so we're looking now at how do we actually penetrate into the communities and identify the skills that an individual that may not have that degree that we've talked about over the last 100 years. You got to have your degree to get in. How do we actually pull those skills from their experience that we've seen in the past? And you're looking at an entire shift, a dynamic shift in the philosophy of what we do. The second thing that we look at the state is application. One of the challenges that the state's had is looking at EDI initiatives or EDI as a whole and defining what it is and then framing what it is to the state. But it's also application. How do we take these principles of EDI and actually apply them at that first line leader level and entry level all the way up to the executive director and cabinet levels? And some of the successes that we've seen is it's changed the conversation in our EDIA trainings to, okay, here's what it is, to here's how you use it. And you're seeing customized training all along the board at the different agencies because the diaspora nature of the state, a lot of different funding mechanisms, a lot of different functions, of course. A lot of the state's very statute oriented, very compliance oriented. And so how do we take those initiatives specifically towards belonging, towards inclusion, and apply them to how we do business? And the intent is to really change how the leadership thinks. And by leadership, I mean anybody that has any dog in the hunt, anybody that has any say, any skin in the game, to go, how do I actually serve the constituents and how do I help the people that are actually here under my stewardship as a leader and make sure that we're able to accomplish our mission? And that's one fundamental change that we've seen at the state to really awesome successes that I'm excited to talk about as we move forward. But that's a little bit about me, Wes Porter, and some of the things that I do at the state. So with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Ross.
Well, thank you to all the panelists. And let me just give a shout out to the current governor and his administration. You know, the fact that he elevated someone to serve as a chief diversity officer for the state of Utah, and all that means, right? It's looking at a whole of government at the state level to make sure we are inclusive, because government is meant to serve the constituents of whatever jurisdiction there is. And so the fact that there's someone internally, and in fact, team members internally, that are looking at the process, that are looking at applications and skill sets, I think it really speaks to how broad this conversation is. Years ago, when I was the president of the Utah Minority Bar Association, we brought in the general counsel from General Motors, and he really talked about how the private sector and those entities that work with General Motors were going to have to ensure that there was diversity in their legal staff on their cases. And so, you know, I wanted us to have this overview of what's going on, not in some other state, right, where they are further along. By the way, Utah's a little behind in this conversation. We see it in the numbers we have relative to gender inclusion and pay parity and things along what the Women Leadership Institute brings to the conversation. But in Utah, we have leading institutions and leading organizations, and in fact, the state that is working on these things. And I think that's helpful for the bar to understand that there are resources out there. Our clients are thinking about these things. They are working on these things, and we need to all be working together. So let me ask the panelists to actually bring some real examples to what you guys are doing with the organizations or with the businesses. I know Sui Lang has really got some very dynamic offerings that she has executed at Zions Bank. I think that would be helpful, as well as the others. We've heard a little bit about some of those things with trainings, but what else and how else is that conversation unfolding? Maybe in the same order for the discussion.
Sure, Ross. So it sounds like community partnerships, investments in businesses, things like that is the question. So a couple of things that you were just noting too. I want to just applaud Utah as well. Utah does public-private sector partnerships really well. And a couple of wins that came out of this last legislative session was funding for women's equality work. That is one thing that Zions Bank has been championing for the past couple of years since I've been in this role. According to the Wallet Hub study, Utah and Idaho rank 50th and 49th in the country when it comes to women's equality in particular. And so Wes, your colleague Nubia Pena has been she's a dear friend, sister, and colleague of mine in doing this work. So we've got Nubia Pena, myself, and Dr. Susan Madsen, who runs the Utah Women in Leadership Project. She's the premier kind of research arm of all of this in the state. So the three of us have pulled together a number of convenings over the past couple of years of influencers that could help shift and move the needle on women's equality. There are three buckets in which all the research is organized into. Number one, it's education. Number two, it's workplace experience and culture and all of that. And the third one is representation in public office. And so we've developed a strategic plan, and we're calling it a bolder way forward that will be launching in June. And any of you, if you are interested in joining our convening, it'll be on our new tech campus. And we're trying to make space for about 400 community leaders and advocates who are interested in supporting these efforts. Please reach out to me directly if you'd like to be a part of that. So that's one kind of big arm for women. Also during the session, 1.5 million was awarded to 3 women's organizations, kind of came together. It was the Utah Business, the Women's Business Center at the Salt Lake Chamber, and then She Money, which is one of Zions Bank's most recent significant investments in women as well, which is financial feminism, really investing in women-owned businesses, teaching them financial literacy and financial empowerment, really, financial independence. So that's that arm. And then venture.org. So those 3 organizations cumulatively got awarded 1.5 million in this past session. So those are some wins. Other things that we're doing, Ross, you and I partner with the Salt Lake Chamber in offering diversity and inclusion training program for small businesses specifically. One thing that we're learning here in corporate Utah is that not every business has the capacity to hire an FTE like a me to run or manage diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so the message really is to say to small businesses, and small businesses are the backbone of our economy. They absolutely play a critical role in building cultures of inclusion within their organizations and with the clients and partners that they work with in our community as well. And so that offering is designed to serve small businesses and explore ways in which they can develop strategies, implement programs, build relationships, and really just integrating it into the manner in which they do business, right? It really is values, it's principles that we encourage people to integrate into the manner in which you do business, right? And so a lot of the conversation in this space can be around social justice, racial justice, economic justice, which is true, but oftentimes it can get politicized to the point where it's starting to exclude people. And then we're moving in my personal view, the wrong direction. And so really defining it as it's opening opportunity, it's access, and it's people. All people. So that's one. And then also as a bank, we have one of the premier products on the market, not just in Utah or our regional footprint, but in the industry, which is a special purpose lending program for small businesses that are women-owned, veteran-owned, LGBTQ-owned, and ethnic minority-owned. And that's our small business diversity banking program. And so we see that as an opportunity to invest in businesses that have for far too long or historically been denied opportunity and access to the capital that they need to succeed. So those are just some examples.
Thank you, Olivia. And I'll just say too, certainly your partners in external, but also what you're doing internally as far as trainings or offerings. And community presence.
Thank you, Ross. So I shared earlier when I was introducing myself about the efforts we've done with the Utah court system statewide and speaking at the prosecutors retreat, training the Utah State juvenile court judges. I think getting into these spaces shows an intentionality on behalf of the state that we want to have these conversations. And no matter how early we are in the stage of starting a conversation, I definitely applaud the Utah court system for starting that conversation. And I think that is something that we can all do individually. I love what Sui Lang talked about. When we have an approach that comes from the top, you have that buy-in and it builds upon the entire organization. What we look to do is build that change at all levels at the same time. And I mean, hopefully that can happen. And the one thing that we love to build with everybody is that, yes, we are a very small community, the LGBTQ community, but we love to highlight that everything that we've done in the state of Utah, it hasn't been just done by the LGBTQ community because we are a small community. It's been done with our allies. And without allies, we would not be able to have the progress that we have built in the state of Utah. So that is something that I think every single person on this call can take away, that you can be an ally. An ally, it does not mean that you have to be wearing a rainbow t-shirt or anything like that. It's literally just making space for a conversation. If you hear something different, it's like, okay, well, let me learn a little bit here, and really putting ourselves in that position. That is one of the things that our program, Business Quality Leader, really kind of aims at doing, and empowering individuals on how to have these conversations. That internally, a lot of the work that we do, we work legislatively, but we also have our education arm. We've started launching an employee resource group quarterly meeting. But even being here with all of these individuals, I'm trying to get different ideas of what we can do quarterly with this very specific demographic. So I think we should definitely talk about that and see where we can land on that.
Very good. Wes?
Yes, no, I'm very excited about this. So a couple things that we have in the state really comes down to a story. So let me just share this with the group here. So I mean, you do a show of hands, you do however you want to do it on Zoom, on Zoom, excuse me. But how many here are right-handed people? And I would guess that the vast majority of individuals here are right-handed, right? So I got a whole bunch of raised hands. All right, how many here are left-handed people? Now, what's interesting about this is the number is very, very small, right? So my question to the group, and I'll tie this into what we're doing at the state. My question to the group is this: do we live in a right-handed world or a left-handed world? What do you think? And tell me why. And so some of the things that are popping up is like, well, we live in a right-handed world. And some of the things that I'm seeing is look at guitars, look at shifters on cars, look at coffee mugs are probably my favorite. You hold a coffee mug with your right hand, you can see a picture. You hold it with your left hand, no picture, right? So it's pretty deep when you look at it that way. So to all my right-handed people, did we wake up this morning and pat ourselves on the chest and say, power to the right-handed people, my people rule? And we strutted out with this undeserved swagger to work today, right? Of course we didn't. But how many times do we hear this, especially in the office? Oh, I really could use some left-handed scissors. Or we take someone to lunch, it's like, I can't sit there on the booth in that area of the booth because I'm left-handed. I need to be able to eat well. And we say, hey, you can eat just like I can eat. You can cut things just like I can cut things. But we forget something. We forget that even though we're in the same area, in the same office, in the same state, people are having different experiences. And sometimes when we talk about the norms, right, especially with the amount of right-handed people that we have, I'm right-handed myself, the norm is, hey, we get right-handed scissors, we don't even think about the left, and that becomes the new culture, right? That becomes the cultural norms. Now, to tie that into the state, what we're doing at the state is we're looking at and we're teaching a training strategy that specifically focuses on the understanding that at every different level inside the state, we are living different experiences. Whether you're in the same job title, whether you're in the same department, agency, division, we all have different experiences. And we tie that into our inclusive leadership training that we have. And so we partnered with a couple different areas to talk about these experiences. The first one that we partnered with is the Women's Leadership Institute. And we've decided to take on, especially government operations, the Elevate Her Challenge. And what that is really bringing men and women to a panel discussion, much like this, to discuss the different experiences that women have had in the workplace here in Utah, specifically at the state. And the intent behind it is to show that we're having different experiences, and then to tie that into our decision-making and some of the biases that we have in our decision-making processes, and to look at our decision-making processes. We have some pretty neat results with that, and we've really brought a a atmosphere of vulnerability to the state, especially to the state leadership that we haven't seen before, because we're taking that tactical pause and taking a knee and looking at, well, if they're having a different experiences right now, what have I done in the past to either to mitigate that, to talk about it, or what have I done in the past to not even think about it? And so our training strategy actually changed in the state with these partnerships that we have moving forward. A couple of things that we look at specifically, and I alluded to this before in the introduction, was we look at application. And so we talk about reframing and defining through our expanding opportunity framework that Nubia took the lead on. I was just lucky enough to work with her on this, which is really the foundational knowledge of what EDIA is in the state of Utah in state government. But we looked at reframing it, which is you take the definitions and I go to the first line leaders and say, okay, you have to make a strategic plan inside EDIA. What are you looking for? And we're able to really boil down like equity. What am I looking at? Equity. I'm looking at policies. I'm looking at procedures. I'm looking at these things. These are things that I can do as a manager. When I look at diversity, what's my quantifiable numbers of who's at the table and who do we serve? When I look at inclusion and belonging, well, that's my culture. What do I need to do in my culture? When I look at access, that's my internal and external interface. And that simple conversation has been able to give power to the leaders to say, all right, they're talking about equity. Here's what this means. And here's how I look at that from a state agency's perspective and how I'm able to work with those specific constituents that are in my community. And we're finding some tremendous successes in these specific areas of how we look at intent versus impact. Before the state of Utah was like, oh, the intent was to do this for the community. Oh, the impact wasn't great. Said, yeah, but the intent was good. So I'm just going to focus on that. We're focusing now on the impact of what we wanted to do to what actually happened, and then go back to our decision-making process of making sure that we actually get the impact that we're looking for by bringing in the right people from the communities and having those conversations. So those are the few success stories and different things that we're having at the state of Utah. So with that, I'll head it back to you, Ross.
Yeah, let me just say how important that really is. I think people really do mean well. They really are, particularly now, engaged in this conversation. Oftentimes, they're just uncertain about what to do and how to do and what resources are available. So, starting is critical, obviously, but I really like the analysis you have of what has the impact been? Did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish, what we need to accomplish? The state is 24.5% ethnic diverse now. They're very young, though. They're in the K through 12 system, but they're on their way. And we, as a professional community, need to ensure that they are drawn to our professions, and not just to our professions, but to our specific firms and agencies and departments. And so, making sure we're reaching out, we're looking for that talent, we're making sure that talent knows that we want them in our spaces, I think is going to be critical. I also wanted to hit on this notion of allyship, how incredibly impactful and required it is to have allies, whether it's a mentor at our places of work, whether it's people that have a relationship to the issue that we are discussing, right? I'll just say that, we don't have to be personally disabled to be an advocate for those that are, or for our grandchildren that maybe have ADHD or that have autism or who have, some other life event and experience that needs extra care. So I think the allyship is so critical. And let me just applaud Equality Utah in really championing that conversation for years in our community. They have an allies dinner that really highlights the fact that we're all in this together. And so I just think that's so incredibly important. In this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we often say that, it's never a destination, but it's being on the course, because we never really master and finish the work, right? We're always looking to improve, and things change and views change. So I wonder if the panelists could provide a little bit of analysis they have in where we are specifically in Utah in this diversity, equity, and inclusion effort. I mentioned I didn't think we were as far along in some other states, but talk to us a little bit about where we are, where we've been, and where you think we can ultimately be. And let's reverse the order this time, if we might. So we'll ask Wes to provide feedback first.
No, it sounds great. Excellent question. I was thinking about that a little bit earlier. So my family comes from San Diego, California. So I've been in Utah since I was 5 years old. My grandfather moved me here, and the rest of my family came up. And I don't know if the panel knows, but I live out here in Vernal, Utah. So I don't know if anyone's ever been out to Dinosaur Land. Skinwalker Ranch is right over there, and so is the monument. So we're kind of, everyone gives me the jokes like, "Wes, you're banished out there." I said, "Yeah, it's 3 hours from Vernal to Salt Lake, but it's about 8 hours from Salt Lake to Vernal. So no one really comes out here because it's a bit longer trip. But that is okay." But what I found, especially with a rural Utah point of view of where we are and in this time of work and where we've been, here's what I found at the state in rural Utah specifically as well. There's something different that's happening, and that's I'm seeing a practice of curiosity, right? I think there's the notion that, oh, this will go away, this will be a phase. I think that's past, even here in rural Utah. But what I found is that people are starting to ask those real questions, and to what Sui Lang mentioned about, and Olivia, what does allyship actually look like? Those are the types of questions that I'm seeing pop up. And what that's doing, that's really showing where we are. We're able to ask those specific questions and practice that curiosity. A lot of times we get compared to other states, you know, and where they are on their particular journey. But what I found is looking at the population of Utah, especially when we look at the different, not just demographics of ethnicity, but looking at demographics of what people believe in those areas. Comparing ourselves to ourselves is probably the best thing that we can look at and practice on our particular journey, because we are different. And I think when we focus on why we are Utah, how we look at things, that actually gauges us and allows us to move forward in ways and developing strategies that we don't see in other different places. Now, do I think we have a long way to go still? Yes, I do. And if you look at the last legislative session, we have some massive wins, and we've also got some challenges and obstacles that popped up that, in my opinion, comes from the people wanting to know and practice curiosity, but doing it in a way that's not necessarily with allyship, or doing it in a way that's not necessarily inclusive and bringing these different ideas to the table. So we do have a little bit way to go. Where do I see Utah going? Utah, and I'll go to what Olivia talked about our protections for the LGBTQ community. We have the capacity to do some amazing different things. I do believe that Utah really is going to be the standard bearer of how to integrate the conservative ideas with liberal ideas into a way that turns us and them into we. And I think that what we're going to see in the future with that, with tremendous hard work, with tears, gnashing of teeth, all that kind of different things. It's going to be an uphill challenge, but I think we're going to see a we is greater than me aspect of Utah in the future. So I'm very optimistic. I have high hopes, and it's very interesting to see the different people at all different levels with different views really work towards this type of work. And honestly, whether they know it or not, right? A lot of the times when I do training, I talk about belonging and I tie inclusion into culture, and you see this light bulb goes off. It's like, oh yeah, even out here in rural Utah, we want to be heard. We want to be included in legislative and decision-making processes. So does everybody. And that's what belonging, that's what inclusion is. And we're able to tie that to real life scenarios that people are going through in their different experiences. So super excited to see where we go. I'm very optimistic. Do we have a little way to go? Sure, absolutely. But there's no place I'd rather be than getting that work moving. So with that, I'll toss it over.
You know, Wes, we're going to be out there. What is it? We're going to be doing a presentation, a training with is it the 8th District Courthouse out there in Vernal? Yeah. So we're going to be out there next week, I believe. So that would be really cool.
I hope I can see it. That'd be great.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. I think we need to be, I like to make sure that my program is intentional about reaching out into the state of Utah, into the very heart of it. And that is how we start that conversation. My background is in social psychology, and I love to study how groups work. And even though Utah is definitely a very unique culture, it doesn't escape from a lot of what happens in groups. It is hard to go against the group because people react from fear or love. And sometimes it is scary to go against the group or to say, yeah, what if I do listen to this, or if I am open to listening to a conversation, is that going to make people believe that I'm part of that other group? So it's getting over that fear. And one of the things that we as practitioners of this diversity, equity, inclusion is really showing that way. How can we make it easier for folks to understand that we all move forward together, that diversity affects everybody, not affect in a negative way, but it affects us all in a positive way as well. The more we know about each other, I think building those connections, being intentional about reaching into rural areas, it really furthers that conversation. And we've been very fortunate that we've taken the conversation of the LGBTQ community into Vernal, Utah. The other day I went to Ephraim. I had never been to Ephraim, Utah, and I found myself there. Could you imagine people talking about the LGBTQ community in Ephraim? It is definitely something that you wouldn't expect, but we're building it. And I think when we're intentional about it, we go a long way with that.
I just love everything that my colleagues are sharing. And thank you, Ross, for going to Wes first and not me on this question, because I saw the question in your notes earlier and I wasn't sure how to respond to that. It really depends on what you're looking at, what aspects. But I love what both of my colleagues have shared. Wes, love the analogy you have with the left hand, right hand. I'm right-handed, my daughter is left-handed. So we can't sit next to each other at dinner. Otherwise, we won't get any food in our mouths. We found ourselves doing that. But I love that analogy and love the theme of curiosity that you brought up as well. I see that a lot in the minds, the hearts of Utahns. Another thing that I've observed here in Utah is the sincerity. Oh my gosh. And people here are so nice, almost to the point where it's annoying. And this is me, like as a cynic, coming back from the East Coast, the way that we engage with people back there is slightly different than we are here. People bring over a plate of brownies to welcome you to the neighborhood. And in DC, I could live next to my neighbor for 15 years and not know his first name, And so it's a different culture here. And I love it. I kind of describe Utah as Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. So we're all just in this community together. I also want to acknowledge Equality Utah. You guys do allyship so beautifully and brilliantly, effectively and successfully. Recognizing the community that you do, or being the voice for the LGBTQ community in a state like Utah is no easy task. But every time I attend Pride Week or the Pride Parade or any of your events, I leave that engagement feeling the love. It's very unifying, it's uplifting, it's inspiring, it's motivating, as everyone belongs here, right? And so it's that spirit. And the same thing, giving props to our Governor Cox has also led Utah in a way in which it embraces its differences. And one thing I've loved, again, going from Washington to a state, at the federal level, you can oftentimes feel very disconnected from the communities that you represent because you're at this high level, you're in policy conversations all the time, not a lot of time in community. And one thing I love about being in a state and working at the local level is access, right? So, I feel like with Governor Cox, you could just text him and he's gonna respond to you, or hit him up on Facebook and he's gonna say, hey, yeah, how can we help, And it's accessible, right? There's access. So this is a big part of creating this culture of inclusion that we're all talking about as well. And in terms of where I think Utah is, I am so optimistic about the state of Utah. And I did not come back to Utah with that attitude. I was almost dragging my feet. I moved back to Utah about 5 years ago for personal reasons, my daughter's high school experience, and she wanted that traditional, cheerleading, sports teams, things like that. And charter school, she was back in DC, was strictly academic, absolutely set her up to be successful in academics. She's now a proud Bruin at UCLA right now, but didn't have that social aspect. And so we moved back to Utah for that. And I really had no plan for my career. Thought I'd just figure out when I got here. I applied for a billion jobs. None of them worked out for one reason or another. Sometimes I think I sabotaged the opportunity as well, because I could just tell, yeah, I don't know if this is going to work. So started consulting, building my network, and my kid was thriving, mind you. And this is what parents do. We make sacrifices for our children to succeed. And so I was like, okay, fine, let me try to make Utah work. And that would be my note and message to everyone here, make Utah work. And so I just started joining boards, commissions, building relationships in the community, attending events, supporting efforts that I was passionate about. And, you know, fast forward to 2020, end of 2020, that's when 3 organizations reached out to me in the height of the pandemic, strongly encouraging me to apply for these positions. And Zions Bank was one of them. And so I now say I have the dream job. I'm working for the dream boss. I'm doing the work I've always dreamed of doing. And I feel like we're doing it in a meaningful and impactful way with the right intentions, right? I oftentimes describe the work we do as being in the business of opening hearts and strengthening minds. And who would be against that, right? So really kind of thoroughly vetting your talking points, your missions, your visions, the way in which you're talking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that you're doing really matters. It makes a difference. And so knowing your audience and tailoring your comm strategy accordingly is the way to do it. But again, Utah, strongest economy in the country, fastest growing state over the past 10 years, youngest state in the nation. And in my view, the most advanced levels of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is creativity and innovation. And Utah does that well. So I'm so optimistic about Utah because the more I engage in DEI, I would love to see, this is very forward thinking, but I would love to see the conversations being less about gender and, you know, all these identities, gender or race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, all these different identities that can far too often serve as differences that divide us, but more so about who has the best idea, right? And also creating cultures in our organizations that will set up every employee to perform at their best. And when employees feel heard, valued, seen, invested in, supported, they will show up and give you their best. That is what corporations, that's the bottom line, the business case for corporations. And governing institutions as well, and nonprofit organizations as well. How can we create that type of culture where people aren't just looking at their watches waiting for 5 o'clock to come around so they can clock out? Like they're so passionate, excited about the work that they're doing and engaged, and they know it matters. They know they are valued in the value that they bring to the table. They can't wait to get there, and they're not even paying attention. I mean, actually, that's kind of something I need to work on in setting those boundaries, but you see what I mean. So again, excited about what we're doing here in Utah and so honored to have collaborators and partners like all of you in championing it.
Thank you very much. Those are all excellent examples and kind of analysis of where we are and the optimism for our state in the future. Let me invite the participants that are part of this conversation to weigh in a little more. I'm very interested in getting your questions and comments in the chat. And so please feel free to post there and we'll get these panelists to respond and take advantage of their expertise. So again, please do give us your questions. Maybe while waiting, I will ask, how do you have these sometimes challenging conversations and do it in a way that is ultimately productive, right? Sometimes this can be seen as, again, I don't fit in some of the traditional ways of diversity. And oftentimes we need to have those senior leaders or those managers of companies or law firms or organizations. They really have to feel like they are part of the conversation, that they have value in their views. And so how do we move from people feeling like they don't have a say, or they're afraid to have a say, or they don't feel like this is something for them, to making them feel like they're part of this conversation, that they really are part of change and fit. And so I'm curious to hear how you have those conversations with examples. Maybe Olivia, would you mind going first, and then we'll ask Sui Lang and then Wes.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. So there's very easy things that we can do that really push a conversation forward. Oftentimes people, whenever we're engaging in a conversation, regardless of who it is with state governor or with our children or whatnot, we're ready, we're listening to respond, and we're ready to already say what we're going to say. We're thinking of what we're going to say, and no matter what the other person is saying, we're building our own response without really listening to the other person. I think when we listen to understand instead of listening to respond, it gives great power to a conversation moving forward, because we all want to feel heard. We all want to feel understood. So regardless what a conversation may be about, this is something that can be practiced at every single space. Listening to understand, and then just even telling ourselves, I'm not here to argue, to put forward anything. I am here to build a conversation with Sui Lang, with Wes, with Ross, and really listening to what they have to say, why they believe what they believe. And that really builds an understanding with other individuals. And that actually builds a way forward, because now you're making somebody feel valuable, feel heard. That goes such a long way in building rapport and building progress in every single space. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Very good advice, actually. I've heard many times this notion that we have two ears and one mouth, and we should use them in that proportion. Listening is critical. Sui Lang.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree with that. I would say my first response is one-on-one conversations. So a lot of this work is done through conversations. It could be one-on-one. Well, I guess you could start with yourself, the internal dialogue that you say to set your conversations you have with yourself all day long, the one-on-ones, small group, and then large group settings, town halls, things like that. I would say the most effective way to move forward this work, because again, we are shifting, opening hearts and strengthening minds. It's one-on-one conversation. So one thing that I'm doing at Zions Bank internally, Scott and I have decided, it's called an EVP tour, where I'm sitting down having one-on-one hour-long conversations with each of our EVPs across the bank and the enterprise. And in those conversations, I can have those, the conversations that are sensitive. Individuals will share things with me, right? If I create that safety for them and trust with them, that they may not be able to share in a larger group setting, if that makes sense. And so that's also a key piece to doing this work, is building trust, right? We talk a lot about circles of trust at the bank as well. The entire bank is this macro circle of trust. And within that macro circle, there are multiple micro circles of trust. And most people, their inner circle of trust is more micro than it is macro. Think of what your inner circle of trust looks like. Is it 5 people or is it 50 people? It's generally 3 to 5 people. And so if you can start there and building those one-on-one relationships, deep one-on-one relationships, that will go very far. And so oftentimes those happen in private one-on-one. So encouraging that, and also just making sure you don't compromise that trust, right? It really it's very hard to build it back once it's compromised. And again, that goes into the banking industry as well, too, as many of you seen in our industry. Once you lose confidence in an individual or an institution, that's when you start to see a decline in activity, in engagement, in deposits, to be frank. So that's what I have to share on that note.
Thank you. Wes?
No, yeah, excellent. Wonderful approaches. We actually use a lot of those things that Olivia and Sui Lang talked about. One thing that I've found as a good practice, especially in my role, where we focus on the internal side, right? Where we focus on management, we focus on policy and procedure, is that I've had to take the time, and it's not easy in a large setting. I do find it easier, just like what Sui Lang said, in a one-on-one, but I have to take the time to lead and show where EDIA is prevalent in their either job duties or in their own experience. I'll give you an example. So out here in Burl, Utah, obviously a very conservative area. I love it out here in Burl. I love raising my children out here. When people find out what I do, especially being raised out here, they're often surprised, right? Especially out here in rural Utah. But one thing that I've been able to do to help them and help myself practice that curiosity of hey, you know, diversity, this thing that's over there, that's something the Wasatch Front does. We don't do that kind of thing out here, which I've heard once or twice. That's not prevalent, but I have heard that out here, is to show a real life example of what an EDIA challenge that they've had and tie that into the bigger picture. I'll give you an example. One thing that we really pushed out here in the Uinta Basin is how do we get our voice heard in these large legislative decisions, especially when we're very oil energy centric community and tax dollars go here to do different things. How do we get those tax dollars back? And we feel that sometimes like, oh, they're not listening to us. We're part of this organization. We're part of the state, but we're way out here. No one's listening to us. Well, I'm able to tie that into belonging. I'm able to tie that into inclusion. And what's happened is that gives that pause to go, oh, that's what inclusion is. Like, yes, the same struggle that you have is the struggle that can be seen across the state in different areas, and where it might not be the same. That's what we're talking about in these specific areas. Inside the state, we look a lot towards that policy and procedure and how do we actually audit those and look at those in a way that monitors that intent versus impact. Well, guess what? That's equity. Looking at your policies and procedures, looking at your cultures is belonging, and tying what those are into the application or experience of either employee, team member, or organization, I have found to be very, very successful in really starting that conversation and looking at, expanding opportunity, looking at EDIA through a different lens. And so that's some of the things that we found that's working for us in state.
Yeah, very good examples and illustrations. You know, there really is a difference between how people experience Utah, right? The issues of rural Utah are different than the issues of urban. When I was in the legislature, when we talked around education, for us, it was about class size. But in rural Utah, it's about busing and getting kids to schools. So entirely same goal of educating our youth, but different challenges to making sure we're giving them the best opportunity. A question that's come in that I think is really timely and challenging, and the question is, how do we avoid politicization of DE&I so we don't have incidents like what happened at Stanford Law School earlier this month? And you know, the politicalization, sorry, of this conversation, right? It was funny when a recent bank failed, Silicon Valley Bank. There was a hashtag going around about woke, woke failure or something like that, basically saying that the Silicon Valley Bank failed in part because it was woke in some way. And that seems to be a shortcut to kind of turn people off from the conversation. And I do worry that the importance of DE&I, and again, remembering it means bottom line revenue enhancing opportunity, is being undermined by the politics or the politicization of this issue. And so I wonder if the panelists can speak to how to avoid that happening and what maybe they're observing in this space. Wes, it looks like you're nodding, so maybe I'll go to you first, and then Olivia and Sui Lang.
That's what I get for leaving my camera on, huh? To be the first one. So what's interesting about this is, at the state, in all honesty, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but this is just reality. One thing that we've done at the state is we've we've created a shared language that's different from the normal DEI, right? So a few years ago, we moved it towards EDIA, which is to put a focus on equity first, right? Our policies and procedures. But one thing that we've learned from this last legislative session, one thing that we've learned about the appetite, the landscape when it comes to this particular area is how we present it. And too often not we in general, but too often sometimes DEI is presented as this big behemoth thing that's a club that you will do this, you will do this. And that's something that we've all the panelists have talked about, obviously getting away from not doing that. But we found that as we talk about expanding opportunity, and so we're reframing from EDIA to expanding opportunity, which includes all the aspects of EDIA, but specifically looking at how do we expand opportunities internal for promotions, internal for hiring, external for community engagement. And we're trying to frame it in a way that we all have this shared respect for, which is, yeah, expand opportunity for me, expand opportunity for you, expand opportunity for everybody. How do we move that? Now, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to go. I think talking about EDIA is very important and hitting it on the nose and saying, hey, this is what it is moving forward. But we found that we've had to pivot and we've had to look at it through that lens to be able to actually progress the work forward. And so it's something that I'm interested to see what's going to happen over the next few years. I am very optimistic on it because I have seen positive impacts in how we're talking about it in these different areas. So I'm not sure if that's helpful to the conversation, but it's something that we're going through right now at state.
Thank you.
Oh, there's it is very easy to politicize almost any issue really nowadays, but it does come up, especially when we're engaging a company or whatnot, and some people do tend to ask, I don't feel comfortable with these conversations because it feels like the LGBTQ community has now become a political hot topic, a hot potato per se. But one thing that we love to highlight is that much of the work that is done internally at any workplace, at any system or corporation, is that we do this work to create safe space for people. And that really is what we're doing with having these conversations around either the LGBTQ community or anything else that pertains to the DEI realm. But what we're really doing is building understanding. And that goes beyond anything political or any political party or whatnot. It's really stressing to people that we are there to create understanding and that we're there to build safety for others as well, because we have a lot of this safety when it comes to religious protections and whatnot. And that's really what it is. We want people to feel that they can be who they are in the workplace as well. That is the one thing that I always like to highlight, because whenever we start talking about creating safety for people to be able to work, to be able to conversate and laugh, that includes these issues as well. All we are doing is adding a little bit of education on something that people may not know about. And I think really building on language that takes away anything political really helps a lot.
I agree with what both my colleagues have shared. Also want to note, since my background is in politics, one thing that I have learned is when you start to see opposition, take it as a compliment that what you're doing is working because you're posing a threat, right? A lot of this work has to do with power. All of the isms go back to power. And this is one of the reasons, again, why I chose this role chose to accept this offer at Zions Bank, is to do meaningful social, racial, and economic justice work through a private enterprise. One question that I ask groups that I speak to across the country is, of these three entities, which holds the most power? Is it government? Is it the corporate arena? Or is it the people? An overwhelming majority of people say corporate. Okay, we live in a capitalist society. And so if that is true, right? And again, it's based on your perception, moving something like what we're doing, right, is championing inclusion. We're championing people, diversity and inclusion is the people part of the equation. At a bank, take people out of the equation, what do you have left? A big pile of cash and a bunch of empty buildings. How valuable is that, right? So it's really reiterating the value that people bring to our communities, our organizations, Capitol Hill, our legislatures, all of those things. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so the idea that if some receive, others, if some win, others lose, it's a zero-sum game. And that's not the game that we're in, right? To Olivia's point. So just want to reiterate the importance of having those conversations with all people so that they understand what we're really doing. We're not taking away, we're just opening opportunity. And for some groups, if they have just been conditioned to experiencing life here in America a certain way, the thought of sharing it with more people, it's new to them. You know what I mean? And some just need a little more massaging to accept that, you know, there's more than enough to go around, you know? So again, constant and choosing the right language. To Wes's point, you know, your comm strategy needs to be just right on, right? And using focus groups to kind of test what language, what terms are going to resonate with some groups versus others. It's really important.
Well, and let me add, when I consult with clients, I'm often really centered around the economic outcomes of having a diverse workforce and workplace. You know, most of the people that I interact with, they're either trying to advance the mission of their nonprofit or they're trying to grow revenue. And there's plenty of information and plenty of studies from McKinsey and companies to, you know, individual corporate analysis that having diverse teams and having diverse ideas that comes with fully vetting an issue or looking at product innovation is going to generate increased sales. So when we're centered around making sure that our team is diverse and broad and inclusive means we're going to create a better outcome. And when we're focused on that, I think that helps everyone to understand why this work is so important. And, you know, I'm looking at the questions that have come up, and we have understandably some comments around the fact that women are still challenged in the legal profession, right? They're not at equity partner levels the way that they are reflective in admissions to law school. So, you know, we're not seeing them all the way through to those senior level management positions and equity partner positions. And in fact, an indication is that they're experiencing harassment at higher rates than they had been even in just a few years past. And you juxtaposition that with a comment that indicated that this individual hasn't been or felt included to go to job fairs because they've been a little more restrictive in outreach to people of color or to women, and wonders their place, right? And so I raise these because they illustrate the challenge of this work, right? We are about changing our community. And the one thing I'll say that's really important is recognizing why. Because we have this youth cohort that's coming, and their perceptions on diversity is so much different, right? They don't think anything about the fact that their peers have two moms. It's not a thing. And we just have to realize that that dynamic is part of what we're trying to help solve for in our state so that we continue to have good economy, and we're recruiting businesses from out of state, and we are finding places for everybody. But maybe if the panelists can speak to that challenge, right? Balancing those that have are feeling a little bit left out, or feeling like they don't have footing like they thought they would, because some of the emphasis is on diversity. And again, if we move to the diversity of thought and not specific to gender, you know, that helps, or specific to ethnicity, that helps. But how do we reconcile and have these conversations so that everyone really does feel like they belong? Olivia, would you mind sharing some views?
This is it's really, it's powerful how somebody can really change even just in their own life. So one thing I would like to just tell the ones attending is that there is something very simple we can all do that helps us, and it's in realizing that it's okay to make mistakes. You know, it's okay to not be aware of issues. As we grow up, you know, we hear about the formative years and everything around us that affects us. And that is how we tend to experience life. And that is how we all go around life. We have this lens, and all of our experience that formed us, our family, our friends, whatever was around us, that is what helps us see, understand, interpret the world. When something different does come along that perhaps doesn't fit that lens, so we're not able to truly see with our lens, it suddenly becomes something very different that we may not want to engage. And that is where I believe everybody can say, you know what, I understand that Olivia being transgender, that is something very different. And I am not used to seeing that on a daily basis. Or I am not used to seeing a female lawyer on a daily basis. And just being aware that sometimes it's okay to see something different. It really takes some introspect in realizing that we can embrace something that perhaps we are not as familiar with. That is the biggest thing that we always advise individually for people. As we all go, like we have 266 people here. That means we have 266 individuals that can literally enact this right now. And that is part of that change that we can see, and that can actually start helping others start seeing something different as being okay and something that we can learn.
I really appreciate that. Sui Lang?
Sure. Thank you for this question, Ross. This is why I do yoga about 4 to 5 times a week. It's flexibility, it's focus, it's balance, right? Finding that balance. One thing I want to build upon what Olivia shared, fear of saying the wrong thing. So we hosted a forum last week, and I posed this question to we brought in 2 mental health therapists to talk about the intersection of mental health and the experiences that different employees have in the workplace. And I'm just going to post in the chat her response to that question, which I thought was really, really helpful. Feel the fear and say, I worry that I may say the wrong thing, but I really want to be present in this with you somehow. Anyways, remember to act intentionally because of the kind of person you want to be. So knowing the type of person that you are, you know, going back to Wes's point, intent and impact, or I mean, intention and impact, right? If you are asking with good intent, you know, I think that will be felt in most cases, right? We can't say for every situation, but generally that tone, that energy, that spirit is felt, and you know, that's how we'll move forward. I never thought in my professional career I would see the point where white men are starting to feel left out, but that is what I'm hearing from surveys, not just at Zions Bank, but across companies across the state of Utah. You know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're doing so well on this front. These programs are becoming popular. It's becoming the talk on social media and in the community, and white men are starting to feel left out. So I take that as my responsibility to resolve that. If any, that is my responsibility. Any employee that works for our organization, it's my responsibility and everyone else's to bring them in, to take them along with us. So it doesn't have to become this balancing act, but we all move together towards a common goal, and we need all hands on board to do that successfully. One last thing, just want to note about female representation in law. Oh my gosh. Thank you, every female woman, identifies woman on this call here today. When I lived back in Washington, all my closest friends, inner circle, they're all lawyers. Like everybody had a law degree. Some of the women's leadership circles or convenings that I've been a part of here, it is very rare to have a lawyer in the room. And so again, it starts with high school, college, really inserting that idea to our young women that they can be lawyers and that this profession needs representation because we see things differently, right? And as lawyers, it is your job to interpret what that law means. And that can be interpreted, as you all know, in a myriad of ways. But the more diversity of thought, to your point, Ross, and that's my model, diversity of people, diversity of experience, diversity of thought, those are the three key buckets that I organize and advise people to build out their diversity of inclusion strategy on. But going back to diversity of thought, that is the ultimate goal. And so women have different thoughts. You know, we see things differently, we experience things differently, and that adds value to the bigger picture, the overall conversation.
Yep. Well stated. Wes?
Well, I mean, I think both my colleagues really just kind of nailed it. I mean, there's not much more I can add there. But one thing that I found at the state is really two things. The first one is we were doing a couple different initiatives that people had going, and I was asked to kind of look over them and see where we're at. And a couple of things that I found led to a conversation I had with an individual, which came down to this. What I told them was, you cannot promote inclusion with exclusion. And to the initiative, this person says, hey, you know, we have so many of the over 40 white male here working at the state in these leadership positions. I really want to focus in this area and run this initiative just right here and not bring that thought and that demographic into the conversation. And really what that led to was a real neat, deep conversation with me and the individual, which ended up going with a few others of the diversity of thought and getting away from just the demographic piece, which is important, but to be able to say, let's look at what this individual can actually bring to the table based on their experience and their experience in the different areas. We need that particular piece, which leads me to my second thing, which is grace, right? We live in a society where sometimes it's difficult to give people grace. We're able to point out different things and sharpshoot like we do on Facebook and different areas. But what I found is that as the culture moves towards giving people grace, in other words, focusing on that intent and be able to talk about that impact and giving people that space to learn and that space for you to learn as well, is something that's really moved forward in the state to allow our culture to grow and to really be more inclusive in that specific area, to have those types of conversations. And then finally, you know, I think if I asked the group here, how many in this group of 200 plus people have been to the meeting after the meeting? And I think everyone knows exactly what I'm saying without actually talking about it. One thing that we really focus on is building and to I think Sui Lang talked about it, so did Olivia, that safe space, right? That psychological safety where those different ideas can actually come forward. And, you know, we utilize the 2 and 2 rule in our meetings, which is if I have an idea or a manager has an idea, we say, give me 2 reasons why this will work. And then you hear them and then you ask for 2 reasons why it won't work. And we're creating this space to be able to bring those different ideas forward, and in a space where we feel safe to bring and identify and look at those different perspectives. And that's really what I found to be really the winning strategy here at the state, is to promote an operational environment where that psychological safety allows that diversity of thought to come forward and to have those conversations. So that's some of the things we're going on over there.
Can
That's
I add
wonderful.
something, Ross? And I love the idea of creating safe spaces too, but one thing that we're doing even right here, and I see so many of these questions, is this is a brave space, because many of these questions, it is difficult to answer them. It is difficult to ask them in a large group. So it is important to create, along with safe spaces, we need to create brave spaces for conversation where we can ask those hard questions. And it is very important that we create the safety for the brave conversation.
I think that's very well said. It does brave to ask questions that are challenging and yet part of the dynamic that we're experiencing. The one thing I'll add is keep in mind that we do not stay stagnant in our lives, right? We're constantly changing. Our family dynamic is changing. You know, when a family member comes out as LGBTQ, your perception changes, right? And your engagement changes. When your daughter marries outside of culture, or even out, you know, with same sex, your views change. As you get older, and have protections, and you start experiencing hearing loss and other disability related challenges, your perception changes. So keep in mind that, where we are in this moment may not be fully how we'll be educated along the way. And I think that's important to understand, and how we advocate for our kids and for our family and for our community. Well, we're coming up at the end of our time. Maybe if I could just ask the panelists to give us a minute or two of a final thought or reflection. Let me thank the bar for, again, giving us this opportunity to have these conversations. I'm glad to hear this is a series, because obviously there are questions we did not get to, and we need to be discussing. But if I might, Sui Lang, would you mind giving us closing thoughts, and then Olivia, and then Wes?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ross, Michelle, and all of you for the invitation to join today's conversation. I have learned a lot myself. On a closing note, I just want to go back to values and guiding principles. The majority of my career has been in Washington, D.C. and in the state of Utah, and they sit on opposite ends of the spectrum in so many respects. But when it comes to values, what I've observed in Washington, it's wealth, it's power, it's influence. Here in Utah, what I've experienced is faith, family, community. And those are values that I believe are the differentiator for why Utah will be successful in championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And on that note, I also just want to offer myself to any of you. If you have a question about anything related to this field that you may not feel comfortable asking a colleague or anyone else in your inner circle, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I've heard it all, and so it's impossible to offend me at this point. And I would happy to even just listen to you, right? That there's very much value in just sitting and listening with people and releasing whatever frustrations you may have. So just wanted to throw that out to you again. Such an honor to be with you all today.
Thank you so much for having us, Ross. And, to my colleagues on the panel, you all are amazing people. I admire you so much. I do want to stress again that we all as people, we're part of the solution for these issues. We're part of the solution for building understanding amongst each other, and that everybody has diversity within them, whether they realize it or not. And that is very, very helpful to move forward. So I encourage you all to really look into your own histories and see that we all have that diversity within us. Nobody is just plain cut out, plain Jane or Joe or whatever. We all have a diversity to us, and we all have something to share. So thank you so much for being here, and please reach out. I put in my information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime.
No, this is an absolutely great discussion. Privileged to be here. In all, I'll just throw all my cards on the table. I come from a family of recidivists, right? And so I was talking to some of them before I came on here today, and they're really excited that I'm having these different conversations. My family's is a blended family, very different decisions made through our lives, obviously. But anytime I'm able to speak to a group like this, I absolutely love it, and I appreciate everything that you do, and I think I have an appreciation of the challenges that this group faces on a daily basis. And I think the only thing that I would end with is, when we look at individuals, especially in a corporate or government setting, we look at managing and leading and talking to people at really just the institutional level, which is like the systems and the rules. But what I found through my experiences, that as I look at an individual through not just an institutional lens, but a cultural lens, how they view the world, and then that particular piece which makes them, that individuality, right? There's something that makes Wes Porter different from everyone else, even though father, veteran, or state employee, all these kind of different things. He shares that with a lot of people, but there's that individualism that makes Wes just Wes. We all have that makes us just us. And as we look at the institutional level that we work in, yes, the cultural level that we live in, yes, but also we acknowledge the individual, I think you're going to see grace. I think you're going to see conversations and sharing that we haven't seen before. So with that, once again, privileged to be here. Thank you so much for your time.
Michelle, you want to close us out, and thank you again.
Kind of you, Ross, and to all of our panelists, I just want to say thank you for your authenticity and your vulnerability today. I think I've chosen the right profession. The rule of law is remarkable to me because it continues to reinvent itself. It looks back at itself and is reflective. It notices its errors in judgment and tries to rectify them. It's a remarkable system because it can survive and it can thrive even in times of challenge. And so despite the fact that we may be seeing and noticing all kinds of fracture and division, I hope conversations like this are actually more about bringing us together and creating relationships that sustain themselves, about noticing and respecting what the rule of law can do to influence and shape our communities. And I just want to thank all of our attendees for staying with us, for participating, and I do hope to see several of you at our future sessions. We're holding 3 more of these. Please be on the lookout in your inbox. And a deep gratitude to our panel for just sharing a bit of themselves and being so willing to hear from our community. Thanks to all.
Thanks, everyone.
So good to be with all of you and to meet you and to know you and hear you through your experience and just your joy and the fervor with which you approach your work. If nothing else comes from this conversation, we just spread the pixie dust of our passion and hopefully we got a few allies in the process. And I think so many more things will come from this. Some wonderful policy development. There's some great leaders on this call, including a group of judges. It's a remarkable group that was assembled to hear from you today. So thank you, just deep thanks and appreciation for sharing with us. Ross, for your stewardship, for your vision for what this could be. You exceeded every dream you had in our original conversation. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.